everybody learns the Parsha of the week for themselves. So we just focus in on one or 2 points in the Parsha and discuss them a little bit broader and try to draw a pertinent directive, a pertinent idea that we can use in our own avodah. And another thing I'd like everybody to know, that if I say something, a word or something that I don't understand, they should please stop me and ask me, because there's no point of missing a word and as a result of that missing the whole idea. The Parsha, as we all know, is Parsha Tovoi, which means when you will arrive. And in fact, this Parsha is sort of a very focused synopsis of all the preparations that Eden did.
What's synopsis?
Summary. Of all the preparations that Eden did in entering Eretz Yisrael and establishing their home, their lives in Eretz Yisrael. And the first thing that Moshe Rabbeinu says to them, that when you will come into the land that Hashem is giving you, Virishto v'yashavto bo, you will take it over, you'll conquer it, and you will settle in it. And then you should take the first fruit that will ripen in your field and bring it into the Beis Hamikdash. And then when you bring it to Beis Hamikdash, you have to give it to the Kohen. I'm sure you all learned. And you say what's called vidui. You give thanks, you express what your experience is, you express the gratefulness that you have for the opportunity of having this first ripened fruit to bring to Beis Hamikdash. Bikurim, this is called Bikurim. What Bikurim means, first ripened. Mitzvah Bikurim is different than all other mitzvahs that we have to do with produce. Because you know that in produce we have many mitzvahs, starting with Truma, Meiser, Meiser Sheni, Meiser Oni, and then there's other things that we have to do in order that we should be able to be allowed to eat the produce. When you need a challah, you have to give challah. But all of these things begin at the point when the produce is already processed. It was ripped off the ground, harvested, it was cleaned up, and it was brought into the house and becomes prepared for human consumption. That's when you take the first a little bit for Truma and 1/10, 1/10 for Meiser and so forth. The Bikurim is different. You've learned, I'm sure, in Rashi. Rashi describes how does one identify Bikurim. You have a basket of fruit. How do you know that which one ripened first? Rashi explains that actually you mark the fruit as it first appears, as it first begins to open up, and you say, "Oh, this fruit is going to be first." You mark it. You tie a little rubber band around it, and that is designated as a bikurim. In other words, before anything, before you're ready to partake and to benefit from this fruit, just by seeing it coming forth, you already designate the bikurim. Okay, this is point one, which we're going to put aside for a moment, and then and speak on other aspect of bikurim. there are two opinions regarding Bikurim. When were Eden first obligated to bring Bikurim? There's one opinion that says that are obligated only after that they settled, conquered the whole land, and everyone settled the land, because it says in the Pasuk, "V'yirishto v'yoshavto bo." V'yirishto v'yoshavto bo means that you conquer it, take it over, and you settle it. There's another opinion, Sifri, says, no, that soon as you have, as a person has his own field, even though the land is still not divided, is not conquered totally, as soon as anyone has any fruit ripen or come forth towards ripening in a field that he can call his own, he is obligated, he can bring Bikur. So I want to focus. The other opinion is a separate opinion. I want to focus on these two aspects that I mentioned. One is that Bikurim you take straight from the tree before you had a chance even to benefit from it. And the other is that the obligation comes as soon as you enter the land, essentially. Before it was settled, before Eden took over the whole Eretz Yisrael, before the enemies are all eliminated. I mentioned many times that much of the things that I say, I may be elaborating it, but the core and the thought itself is most of the time based on the Sikha or several Sikhas of the Rebbe. There is something similar in our own daily life that we do daily, but we do not necessarily reflect and recognize what it is, even though the truth is we spoke about it several times over the years. And that is that there is davening, and davening, that we daven in the morning, requires a great preparation. And in the yeshiva, everybody prepares themselves, they learn Ashel Chassidus, they think, they reflect, and they daven. But when before they actually come to the tefillah is the Shemoyne Esrei, there's a whole slew of things that we say, and giving them a chance to reflect on Hashem's presence in our lives. And then we can stand up and say Shemoyne Esrei. But then there is another inyan, where we express our recognition of Hashem's presence. And that is when we first wake up. And there's an interesting point made regarding this, the fact that we just wake up and we don't even wash Negovask. We all know how careful we are about Negovask. Everybody knows what Negovask is, right? We know how careful we are with Negovask if we touch Negovask. Negovask means water for the nails, it's called. Because when a person sleeps, sleep is a state, a semi-state. The Gemara says it's like 1/60th of death. And therefore there is an aspect of tumah, of impurity, resting on a person in sleep. When he wakes up, the neshama comes back to him, the soul comes back to him, and therefore the entire tumah, all of that leaves him, except on the tips of his finger and the nails that still remains. And that's why we have to wash our hands in a very special way, which means 6 times alternatively. And that removes, that says in Zohar, that cleans up, that removes this impurity. And we are very careful with that. We don't touch any food. And even if you do touch the food, generally speaking, we try not even to partake of this food. We don't touch our clothing. The Shulchan Aruch says you shouldn't even touch your clothing, if possible, without negavas. So we are very careful with negavas. Surely we're not allowed to. We don't learn, and we don't daven. Of course not. Davening requires more purity than learning it. And yet, when we wake up in the morning, and there is an emphasis made emphatically, should do it before Negel Wasser, we say right away, Moide Ani. Moide Ani is an acknowledgement of Hashem's presence in our lives, an acknowledgement further that the fact that I woke up gives me the immediate recognition that Hashem has restored the neshama into me. I don't have to have a second thought. This is not something which I need to study and reflect and philosophize about it. This is something which I recognize instantaneously. Which is again reflective, and it correlates to the concept where you take bikurim before anything happens, before your any kind of personal experience. And here's what I want to elaborate. I mean, this is just a point. I want to elaborate on the concept so that we will be able to have a chance to reflect and see its truth and how we can relate to it. Normally, we are all aware, to one degree or another, more or less, of Hashem's presence in our lives. Some of us have actually recognize it to the extent that they actually have a certain sense of trust. Things are going to work out because Hashem is going to see to it that it's going to work out. Some have a lesser degree of recognition. But we all recognize, at least for a moment, when we see what's called Hashgacha Protis. Hashgacha Protis is generally translated as divine providence. Hashgacha Protis more specifically means individual providence. When Hashem clearly is involved, not just with the whole world, to make sure the world doesn't fall apart, doesn't dissipate, but with every individual on an individual level. And from time to time, we all come face to face with an experience that we can only interpret with one way. Oh, what Hashgacha Protis? A coincidence that is completely beyond any expectation. But it happens so smoothly, so naturally, that we can miss it. But if we have any sense and any intelligence, we say, wow, this is not something that's happened by itself. This is called Hashgacha Protis. It's not a miracle. It's not an open miracle that hits you in the eye. I don't remember this exact story. Somebody said once that somebody was in a very grave situation. And he asked Hashem, please help me. And then, as he just said it, somebody came and relieved him of the problem. So he says, Hashem, I'm helped already. Don't bother. Don't bother, I was already helped.
Story with the Baal Shem Tov and the Kains,
That's Baal Shem Tov nice. But this is a simple thing that actually happened. Don't bother. I was already helped. So these are the miracles that we live with on a continuous basis. These are miracles that Hashem does with us in a way. He doesn't overwhelm us, doesn't shock us, doesn't hit us in the face. And He gives us a chance to grow up intellectually and emotionally, reflect on these things, and be able to receive and to relate to living in Hashem's world. He gives us all kinds of chances. Once, twice, 100 times. There is a saying from the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab is the previous Rebbe's father. He was the one who established the yeshiva Temchet Mimi, which we are celebrating always. Tonight is the Rosh Hashanah for the yeshiva, Tosvov Elul. So the Rebbe Rashab said that actually the first one to say that Reb Maharash before that a business person is constantly confronting Hashgacha Pratis. He needs to process a certain thing. He needs a certain contact, and he accidentally hits on somebody who knows somebody, and all of a sudden his contact is resolved. Business, much of business, 90% of business essentially contact. Who do you know and how do you get from this person to this person? And all that happens intrusively without him recognizing and seeing how everything is working out. And definitely Hashem wants that we should come to recognize this on our own, not just for the purpose that we should recognize it on our own, to test us or anything like that, but we should recognize it on our own so that we actually relate to it, not something that overwhelms us. Because ultimately, it has to be something. It has to be part of our reality. This is the reality of the world we live in. And as long as it overwhelms, then it's not the world we live in. It's not our own intellect that understands it. So how do we get to recognize Hashem's presence in our lives? It is by some kind of occurrence. Under normal circumstances, if a person has a field and he harvests it and it grew properly, and he harvests it and brings it into the house, and he sees the bracha and he sees the success and all that. If he has a munah and he has a sensitivity and all that, he recognizes this is Hashem's bracha, and therefore he will thank Hashem for it. He recognizes that this is not something which just happened naturally. But before anything happens, before any kind of experiences, just, so to speak, looking at the presence of existence of the world, there's nothing in the world, in that observation, there's nothing that awakens him, that makes him think of Hashem. On the contrary, the world conceals godliness. It conceals godliness to us. Not to say that it conceals godliness categorically, completely. It's not. Because the more a person develops his intellect, the more his insight and sensitivity becomes developed, the more he can see that the world really It has a spirit to it. And it's not all physical, it's not all worldly. But certainly at the starting point, we are aware of the physical world, and the physical world seems to be just an entity unto itself. And we don't recognize any godliness in it. In order to recognize godliness, something has to occur. Something unusual, something unexpected, something that is not in line with the natural process. There's a story of the Rebbe Maharash. Someone, a Chassid, had a business. He was a contractor, and he did some services for the government. And there was jealousy. A lot of people were jealous of him, and they reported to the government that he was not honest in his contract. And this was a very serious accusation. And the thing developed to the point where he had to stand trial. He was very scared. Trial, huh? Mishpat. He had to stand trial. A trial. Trial means a mishpat, a court. He had to go to court. He was very, very scared. He was a Jew, first of all, a Fruman Yid, and there was no love lost on a Yid in general. And it's very difficult to prove certain things. You know, the accusation was so constructed, so ingenuity constructed, that it was definitely very difficult to refute it. But he knew that he was 100% innocent, 100% honest. So he went to the Rebbe Maharash, and Rebbe Maharash said to him that when he takes the train to go to Petersburg, that was the capital city, this is under the Tsar, capital city, Petersburg, he should ride in the first class train. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I don't know if any one of you saw a train anymore. I mean, now we fly. A train is a boxcar, and a line of trains, of cars, and there are different categories. There's a plane car where you sit, and there's a Pullman where you have your own compartment, a very comfortable compartment. You can even stretch out and sleep. There are all kinds of different categories. So and it was the cost between a regular coach and a first class is a very big difference. So the Rebbe said to him he should take first class ticket. That was the answer to his whole problem. So of course he did that. He bought a first class ticket. And he came to the station, he mounted the car, and he sat down. And whatever privacy they have over there, but there is also in these cars there is also a sitting room. These are very luxuriously set up. There's a sitting room where you can sit, sip coffee, in kind of a bar or restaurant setup. So he sat down over there, and next to him or facing him sat down another gentleman, and they opened the conversation. And each one related to whatever it is. They were intelligent people. And he kind of poured out his heart. He says, I'm going to Petersburg because I'm standing trial, because I don't know what to do, and I'm really at a loss. And really, this is all vicious blasphemy, totally untrue. They came to Petersburg. They parted ways. And so he was waiting a couple of days for his case to come up. He came to court with his lawyers, whatever it may be. He comes into court, and who is presiding on the case? The gentleman that he met in the first class train. So he had already gotten familiar with him, and he had to question him about it, and he was convinced that he was innocent. So he dismissed the whole case. So then when you look back on it and say, well, yeah, he met somebody up, but this was a clear case of Hashgacha Pratis in the highest level. But we need the power, the intellectual power to reflect on it and translate that in our lives and remember this. Remember this at other times. Remember this at times when we are at a loss, to remember that really we're not alone. Hashem is with us all the time. Now that I've touched on this, I want to tell you a little story that actually occurred with someone that I knew personally. That happened. That I knew personally. This was a Yid. I was in Montreal, a student in Montreal at the time, in Yeshiva. And this was a gentleman who was early 40s. He was at one time a Yeshiva Bocher himself, and then I don't know exactly what happened. He completely turned away from Yiddishkeit. He was not only turned away from Yiddishkeit, he turned away from normal living. He became a tramp. But he was an intelligent man. He kind of didn't have a home, not because he couldn't have a home, but he couldn't settle down. Someplace something turned that he lost himself in the world. But he was a very intelligent man, and he certainly knew a lot about it. He learned in yeshiva for many years. So he used to come into the yeshiva, and I kind of befriended him. I spoke to him, I learned with him a little bit. Then there was a more or less a longer period of time that he didn't come to the yeshiva. And then finally he reappears. He sat down and says, Abba, he says, I want to tell you a story. He says, I was traveling from this place to this place. And he doesn't travel by car or by bus or by train. He travels by hitchhike. That's the only way he knows how to travel. He's got his little pack, and he stands on the highway, and his finger brings him across. So one time, he was between these two villages, these two towns. He was waiting for a hitch, and nobody stops. And the day is coming to an end. When it becomes dark, the hope for getting picked up is virtually zero, because people are afraid to pick up people at night. By day, at least you can judge what he looks like, whether he's safe to take in. By night, people ignore hitchhikers. So he's waiting. Finally, he gave up. He gave up on hitchhiking. Meantime, it became dark, and it became cool, and it started to drizzle. It started to rain. Light rain. So this added to his misery. He was exhausted. He was cold. He was wet. And he was completely despondent. Despondent means like he lost hope. He lost personal, morale and strength. And he started walking. He has to walk now. He has to walk to the town, however distant he has to walk to the town. So he started walking in town. He's walking along the highway, and he says to himself, he starts talking to himself. No, God, let's see if you know what I am. Give me some kind of an indicator. Oh, no, I'm jumping too fast. He's walking along the line. I want to tell you exactly the way he experienced it. He's walking along the highway. He's very miserable. And he starts thinking to himself, if I had $20, what would I do? $20 This is going back in the 50s, 60s. $20 was more than it is now. $20 can get you around. If I had $20, what would I do? So he starts dreaming. If I had $20, I would take a bus. I would stop a bus, take a bus to the town, and I would check myself into a hotel, and I would take a deep bath, and I would have a good night's sleep. This is what he's dreaming as he's walking in this miserable state. He's walking and walking and walking, and then all of a sudden he starts saying, "No, Rebbeinu Shalom, see what you can do. I promise that if you get me that $20, I will change my ways. I'll settle down. I'll get a job." He was a gifted, that wasn't a problem. I'll settle down, I'll become a mensch again. And he's walking, he says, and he's constantly debating with the Meivashim, with Hashem, can you do it, can you do it? And he says, this is described, as I was walking, he says, and I started believing in my own thoughts, and I started looking under the shrubs, under the very grasses, the little bushes, for the $20. Where is it going to be? How is it going to come? And he's walking out around like this. As he's walking, a car stops, just a little ahead. Somebody noticed him. The car stops. So he walks up to the car, and the man says, "You're cold and tired. I'm going to this town. Happen, I'll take you that as far as I'm going." So he comes into the car, and he says, I'm surprised you stopped, because people don't stop at night anyway. So he took him over, wherever, a few minutes, 20 minutes, I remember that. It's not a long ride by car. He takes him to town. He says, "Okay, this is where I am. This is where I stopped my trip. So be well." And as he's going out from the car, he says, the man turns to him, "I see that you're tired and you're exhausted, you're wet. I want to just give you a little something." And he takes out a $20 and gives him this $20 and says, "Go into a hotel and take a bath and have a good night's rest." Okay? Excuse me? $20. You can take you can go into World Astoria with $20, but you can have a room. So he says, "I took the $20 and I thought I was dreaming. I thought this was fake. I couldn't believe that this is real." He went into the store, he says, I went into the store and asked them to break it down for him, just to test whether it's real. They actually gave him change. Anyway, he did exactly what he was hoping to. He got himself into a hotel, he took his bath, he had a night's sleep. Guess what? Abba, when I woke up in the morning, you know how it is. I was back to the same guy. Nothing happened. So, as Gocha Protis we see all the time. But we have to be wise enough to utilize it, to strengthen ourselves. We can be focused on it, but we have to strengthen ourselves and remember the truth. Remember that this is the reality. So this is on the circumstances where we actually have a chance to reflect and experience and so forth. But when one first wakes up in the morning, what does he know? He hasn't experienced life yet. And yet, we are instructed to say, Moedei Ani, as soon as we wake up. And the reason for that is that actually there is a recognition in our intellect, in our neshama. There's a recognition of Hashem's presence without any manifestation, without anything showing it, without any occurrence. There is definitely just a recognition the way it is. We don't know much to say about it, but it's there. We just know that this is it. When the neshama comes back and we first wake up, before we get confused with all kinds of different things, we recognize something miraculous happened. And the neshama came back, and this is the real thing. Didn't wake me up on its own. And this is...
sorry. You said it's a recognition of godliness without manifestation. So...
Right, without any special thing happening. Just the presence, the very presence of the world, the presence of life itself shows it. Without anything unusual happening. And this is illustrated in the Torah by the mitzvah of Bikurim, where we take a fruit that hasn't yet ripened. We haven't benefited from it. We don't even know what kind of blessing it is. But as soon as we see it coming out of the tree, we immediately recognize, this fruit I have to bring to Beis Hamikdash to express my recognition of Hashem's doing, Hashem's gift. Right. In this respect, right. Well, Pidyon Haben, yeah, okay. Pidyon Haben is a little different. It's a bchor only. It's not every child. Okay. So, I want to go to another part of the parsha, but before I do, I spent enough time on this. Just want to encourage everyone. We have to understand, with all the different experiences and all the different influences that we all experienced, we all had, we are in a constant state of experiencing, of being shown Hashem's presence in our lives. We just have to find the strength and know that this is not done in vain. This is done in order that we should wake up, in order we should start living the real life, the neshama life and the Torah life. So that living in the Torah life is not going to be just, as we saw, a burden, a pressure, but it should be something that enhances and encourages us and gives us the inspiration for better and greater living and greater development. The first indicator of that, as you learned in Tanya just a couple of days ago, was it a couple of days ago, maybe just yesterday, that if a person shows Chas v'Sholom that he is unhappy, this is tantamount to Avodah Zarah. Because if we recognize that everything is from Hashem, then then everything will be deemed to be recognized as a good thing. Avodah Zarah essentially means idol worship. What it means essentially Nobody is idol worship. It means we have strange influences. We have strange influences. We are influenced. We believe in forces or in principles that are completely strange to Torah and godliness. If we think that the natural world has an influence and has a power to give us a success, or the opposite, this is called Avodah Zarah. This is veering away, turning away from Hashem. Because our avodah and our task in life is to recognize and make evident. Evident means to become obvious Hashem's presence in our everyday and every activity. This, in fact, is actually expressed in the very words of this parsha. It says, "When you will come to the land which Hashem is giving you," which means that every moment that we have this land, we have to recognize that this is a land that Hashem is giving us. Every moment that we are here in the yeshiva, and we have the privilege and the opportunity to be in yeshiva and to learn, we have to recognize that this is a gift from the Meibasher, a constant gift. This is not just, I made a decision a year ago or 2 years ago, and this is just a command. Every moment is a gift from Hashem. Is a blessing from Hashem. And that way, when we wake up in the morning, be ready to say Maydani and jump out of bed and be besimcha. Like the Alter Rebbe says, we have to be besimcha. And besimcha means with joy. Anything that a person does with joy, his talents and all of his senses open up, and he absorbs what he is doing much more deeply and much more permanently. You learn something and it sticks. And if he does it, chas v'sholom, reluctantly, then it becomes a burden, and he's unhappy, and it doesn't stay with him. The latter part of the Parsha of the week, there is the Toichacha. The Toichacha means, the word Toichacha means reprimand, admonishment, warning. And Moshe Rabbeinu, this is actually the second time in the Torah. The first time was in Vayikra. And here Moshe Rabbeinu goes through a litany of suffering, Rahman al-Islam. A list, a description of all-encompassing, a general, leaving no opportunity out of Rahman al-Islam, of all kinds of different negative experiences that a person can have. All that serves for both. Moshe Rabbeinu, believe me, did not enjoy speaking like this to the Jewish people. There are 2 points that we need to recognize. First, that the real message of the Toichacha is that regardless of what experiences we see, regardless what suffering the Jewish people will go through, they will remain a people, and they will survive, and they will be reinvigorated again and rejuvenated, and they will always come back. This is a guarantee. No matter what happens. And the history has borne out that what happened to the Jewish people throughout history, again, we don't necessarily have the the intellectual power to concentrate and recognize the reality of this is the very fact that we are still here is the most obvious and the most powerful miracle of all. Because the Tzoros, the suffering that the Jewish people went through, was not just a suffering because, there's famine, there's no food. It was an intended effort by many tyrants throughout history to destroy the Jewish people as a people. An intended, a concerted effort, and they had the power to do it. And their plans were always thwarted after inflicting suffering.
And there was why?
Huh?
After you said, and the place was always...
It was thwarted. Their plans were thwarted, were disrupted, were destroyed, were broken. And the other thing is, I want to tell you that the Toichache itself, the horrific things that are described over there, in a deeper sense, on a higher level, they are actually blessings. And this is something which in Mitzvah Shem you learn, the Torah and all that. They're in effect really blessings, but they're blessings in a hidden way. Like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, in this Pedic, he says that everything emanates from the Chokhmah, but the good is of such magnitude that we can't recognize it. But in fact, it is all good. The next pasha after that is a pasha of actually a consolation. After giving such a description, such a wiping out, such a beating to the people, Moshe Rabbeinu comes back and he re-encourages and strengthens the Jewish people, strengthens us. And he says, regardless of what I've just now said, but you could see, even from your own experience, you see how Hashem is holding on to us. And there's one very important point made in that pasha, which I want to focus on. Moshe Rabbeinu is pointing out to the people. Here, he says, we were journeying through the desert for 40 years. And there were untold miracles accompanying you all the time. And much of it, you were completely oblivious to. Oblivious means you didn't notice it. And he says, you were walking through the desert barefoot, and your feet were not bruised, your feet were not swollen. You went through the desert for 40 years, your garments did not fall apart. The garments remained as fresh as when they were first made. That's abnormal. But when you take things for granted, you don't notice things. And this is the point that Moshe is making, and this is something which relates back to what we spoke before. Moshe said, Hashem did not give you the heart to know and the eyes to see. In other words, you could have something real, something you can have Hashem's presence, Hashem miracles around you, but it's not enough to have it around you. You have to have the heart and the mind and the strength of character to be able to relate and to absorb all of that. And to this Moshe Rabbeinu says, the Gemara says, that because it took 40 years in the desert for Eden to come to this realization, that teaches us that it may take a person 40 years to finally understand what he learned from his Rebbe. To fully understand, it may take 40 years. Which means that there is a long trek, and we have to follow through this journey. And every day and every time that we learn something again and we understand a little bit better, we are making another step towards a full comprehension, a full accomplishment. The Jewish people journeyed in the desert. It says 42 different stops. And it says in the Baal Shem Tov, the Kabbalah from the Baal Shem Tov, that every person has goes through 42 journeys, 42 different stages in his life. The point which I want to focus on is we do not get disappointed because we have to learn something over a second time and a third time and a 10th time. We do not get disappointed because I learned something and I forgot it the next day. It takes time even to see with your eyes what's right in front of you, in order to develop a certain degree of insight and the intellect to be able to relate to what you see. How much more so does it require effort and development to understand what you're learning, and to understand and to be able to relate to it and absorb it and live with it. But one thing is guaranteed, that no effort goes unrewarded. Every effort that a person puts in, there is a success, there is a reward with it. As I spoke one time before, I'm not here, another place, that every time that you learn something and you don't understand, and then you make an extra effort and you get to understand, it's not just that you learn this particular thing. This means a breakthrough. Something that you didn't understand a moment ago, now you're able to understand. This is a breakthrough. And there are a lot of little curtains, a lot of little steps that we have to break through. And just as when a person climbs on the mountain, he makes small steps. And he doesn't realize, he doesn't recognize that each step raises him up a little higher. And as he raises higher, he's able to see a much bigger horizon, much wider view. Every time that one learns and he gets to understand, even if it's a small thing, we don't realize to what extent that opens our minds, that we can understand now a much broader spectrum. We change. It isn't that I learned just this one person. That's not the way it happens. That's not the way it happens. Every effort is rewarded multiple times. And the way Moshe Rabbeinu expresses it, Hashem gives us a heart to know and a mind to understand. And this is how we grow, and this is how we get to really appreciate and really to relate to all the truths that we're learning about. It's all around us, we're all experiencing it. But just like this man over there, he woke up in his hotel room after experiencing such an obvious, miraculous experience. Hashem responded to his prayer, and he came back to the same place where he was. This is where we need to use our strength. This is where we need to convince ourselves, no, this is not the same thing. On a very simple level, we don't have to go, on a very simple level, always remember that you are not alone. And if you have a difficult moment, ask Hashem to help you. and you will see how quickly you will be helped. But then don't tell Hashem, okay, I don't need your help anymore. This is Hashem's help. It should be matzliach, you should have a good year.
Amen.
All the best.
Right.
Right.
I have a question. How is it that we learn that it's 40 years to understand the rabbit? How is it we're connected? Something with the myth, but you said with Moshe.
It's Moshe Rabbeinu says, I journeyed with you for 40 years, and you didn't know anything. Now you begin to know.
He says in the book, like, now you'll get it. The other question I wanted to ask you. I read once that when it says Ve'oyo Kisava, the word Ve'oyo, the Midrash I think says it means joy. It means
Yeah.
I never found any explanation for that. I didn't know how to approach. But
Maybe. It says Ve'oyo is Loshen Simcha, and Vayhi is Loshen Tzar.
But it doesn't explain what's maybe it's like expecting something like Ve'oyo, like it's being like.
You want to turn it?
Last thing I wanted to tell you, you just spoke so much about bitachon. What happens when you realize that you're in the shiva, you have bitachon over you? Every time you step out, let's say you take a plane, you go to a train, you don't see God, mamish, like you never saw God in your life. And there's people that have this, like, I go out and mamish, I don't feel that there's a God in the world. Like, how can I be so, mamish, so
You
low?
have to stop and remind us.
No, I do it, but it's mamish invisible to the highest extent. Like, how are we supposed to fight with that? Because either as much as I learn, it
you
doesn't
just
change.
continue on to learn. It's not true. It changes. It's
I
not
learn
true.
the street, I learn the street,
It does
I start
change.
drinking things and,
It does change. You may not notice that it changed, but it changes.
yeah? Like, when I'm in the airport and I'm traveling, I'm like telling myself, why am I not saying any kind of anything now?
You're not up to the point
I
to be
feel
able
like
to
I'm
say.
lying to myself sometimes. I'm in the shiva, I'm religious, and then I go out and forget about
Hi.
everything.